Shabbat Shalom. It's our pleasure to be with you tonight at Manna from Heaven Ministries. You're listening to Manna Live. Amen? A production of Manna from Heaven Ministries. That's what we say every week on the radio program. Seriously, I believe with all my heart, Father has a word for you tonight, a word in due season. And I believe that He's given you this word in due season to help you, to enable you to make it through some of the things that are in front of us. And perhaps it will explain to you why you're being allowed to go through some of the things that you're going to be allowed to go through. Are you with me? He loves you. And He understands that sometimes there's chastening and correction and disciplining that you need to get you back in the proper direction, back in the proper form. And it may not be that you're being chastened or corrected or disciplined. It may mean that you're just in a training mode to get you a hard body so that you can literally go into the fight, the fray that's in front of us. And I believe this is what this Torah portion's about. The title of it in the English, the King James, is the book of Numbers. And I personally believe it was simply because, and I'm not trying to denigrate the King James English, but it's simply because there are masses of numbers in this particular book. In Hebrew, the title is Bemidbar, and it's literally translated in the wilderness. And what we're going to do tonight, we're going to jump feet first, headlong over our heads, if you will, into something that I believe very few have actually had the privilege of entertaining from this particular Torah portion. We're going to begin to address the Hebrew language and break it down. Hopefully it'll be a simple attempt so that you're not overwhelmed by it. And I would like to suggest, if you're not familiar with the Hebrew language, in particular those that are listening via the net, that you pick up a King James English Bible, and the reason I'm sharing that with you is because most of your concordances will have numbers that are referenced from that. Whatever other particular book you study from, that's okay. But in addition to that, you need to get you something that can carry you back to the Hebrew language. In particular, maybe something along the lines of the Strong's Concordance, Klein's Etymological Dictionary, the Old Testament. You may want to get a better fundamental, rudimentary start in Hebrew word pictures by Frank Seekins. Either of those will at least get you started. And it will begin to enable you to have an understanding of what the Hebrew language tells us. Every word we understand is a picture in itself. And every word then is comprised of letters, and every letter has a corresponding number. So you can't separate them. If you separate the numbers from the letters, you lose part of the meaning that He's trying to convey to you. If you begin to understand the letters and their corresponding numeric values, then it's like the difference between a black and white television and some of the newer 3D Blu-ray editions that you have today. Y'all follow me? Well, that's what we're going to do tonight. We're going to look at this particular Hebrew title, Bemidbar, in the Hebrew language. And it's taken from Numbers chapter 1, verse 1 through chapter 4, verse 20. The phrase in the wilderness is literally written, as I said earlier, Bemidbar. The Hebrew letters are the Beit, Mem, Dalet, and again the Beit, and finally the Hebrew letter Resh. This is a combination of words melded together to form this particular phrase, and they tell a comprehensive story. The only way really to properly understand it is to do like we began last evening, and that's to break it down. Turn to your neighbor and tell them, just break it down. First of all, I would like to look at the Beit Mem, the first two letters, right here, the Beit Mem. And then the root of the word is Dalet Beit Resh, Dabar, and you should be familiar with that. In Hebrew, that's the word for word. And it literally can infer a promised word. You can change the vowel points, and depending on your relationship with Yahweh and the context, it can also mean a destroying word, okay? But the Hebrew letter Beit Mem, when you put them together, it actually forms a word in the Hebrew language called or rendered Bam, and of course it's a Hebrew pronoun, and it literally can be defined as in them. And of course you just looked at the Dalet Beit Resh, the Hebrew word Dabar, Strong's number 1696. It's defined as to speak, declare. It can, as you look at this expanded definition, in addition to saying Bemidbar, in the wilderness, which I believe is misnomered, it's not really an adequate translation. When you begin to break it down as we did and look at the Hebrew language, it can also infer to speak a promised word in them. And so he brings us to the place called the wilderness for the express purpose of speaking a word that has been promised. See, that word promised literally conveys something in the past tense that he's already dictated is yours, and he's going to again speak that word in you. So it's actually revisiting something that has already been promised. He brought us to a wilderness place, and the word wilderness can infer the connotation in the English is a desolate, an arid, a barren place. And if that's the case, you should not be afraid of the wilderness places that he's going to take us in the coming days, because we know, based on these patterns, that he's going to take us again into the wilderness to speak a promised word in us. Now, while I was looking, I began to take the numerical value of the word Bemidbar, and if you look at the Beit, Mem, Dalet, Beit, Resh, the total of those numbers is 248. 248 happens to be the same numerical value as another Hebrew word you may not be familiar with, but you should have seen it throughout the Torah, and it's the word rechem, which means a womb or a belly. So that's exactly what Bemidbar is. The wilderness was a literal physical depiction of a womb or belly, and of course in this instance, it happens to be the place that is now waste and desolate, arid, cursed. And so you have a shadow picture of what was taking place in Numbers chapter 5, where the womb, because it had received the wrong seed, had been made cursed and barren, dead and rotting out. And so Yahweh takes that womb and he brings the children of Israel there, and he speaks life in that particular dead, barren womb and reclaims it. Same thing that took place in Numbers chapter 5, where the adulterous bride is, for all intents and purposes, she has no ability to procreate any longer. She's considered dead, barren, and yet one paid the penalty for her so that she could indeed be fruitful and multiply and replenish again, which is exactly why he brings the children of Israel to this wilderness place. Well, what you find here, as you look at that word rechem, it actually infers the place. This is the natural direction that you want to go when you talk about the womb or the belly. It's the place where a fetus develops and then exits at birth. And so I want you to understand what's taking place when the children of Israel leave Egypt. They're not in their full matured state. And so we point fingers of accusation at them, but we don't understand they have newly been birthed after having left Egypt. Do you see what I'm talking about? And so they go through a seasoning process, a maturation process in the wilderness, which is again another indicator that you and I need the wilderness experience, because a lot of us are spiritual babies. Even though we've been in this thing for a long period of time, Father's going to take you through a maturation process. Are you following me? Now, as I looked at it, I was reminded of that promised word that he planted in them. And of course, you should remember Revelation 13:8, because it was here that he says that the Lamb was slain before the foundation of the world. Well, what was the purpose of the Lamb being slain? It was to redeem Israel. Who was Israel? She was the bride who had harloted herself, had prostituted herself to the pagan gods in Egypt. And so the entire premise behind what's taking place here at Numbers chapter 1 has to do with the reclamation, the redemption, the purchase, if you will, of that bride back from her harlot's condition, and then planting that promised seed in her once again. All of this is being shared with you right here in Numbers chapter 1. Now, what I was sharing with you last night is that there's a dual emphasis on this particular word, wilderness. First, from the English vantage point, you have the connotation that you hear framed with that word wilderness of barren, empty, unpopulated, uncultivated place. But you've already looked at it from the Hebrew, and you get a different perspective. The Hebrew language basically is telling you that it is a place where the promised seed can be planted, okay? Now, if that's the case, you now understand the reason Israel's being brought to this desolate, arid location is so that they could take that promised word Father give them and sit on it and just play church for 40 years. No. The purpose of Israel being brought out of Egypt and brought to this specific location, you need to remember in Joshua chapter 1, verse 1, and it was also told to Abraham that wherever the sole of your foot trods, I will give you that place. Well, this wilderness area belongs to Israel, where they are right now at Mount Sinai, which today currently is in Saudi Arabia. This arid, desolate, for all intents and purposes, unpopulated place, just as it was in Numbers chapter 1, it's still in that basic same condition today. This belongs to Israel. What Father intended for them to do has never been fully accomplished. The land has not been reclaimed. It's not been claimed and refurbished. Are y'all following me? And so what Father did, He brought them there for the purpose of speaking into that place the promised word that He had given to them, I believe, all the way back from Genesis chapter 1. Now, if that's the case, and He's going to take us and put us back in the wilderness at Sinai, you are being tasked with taking that promised word. Well, if you don't have the promised word in you, you'll sit on your laurels for the next season that we're in the wilderness. Are you with me? But if you do have the promised word, we're told in Daniel, those that do know Him, they'll do exploits. The desert is going to become a fruitful place. The arid lands will be watered once again. Are y'all seeing what's being shared with you here? Now, you have a picture of a waste and desolate, uninhabited place, which is depicting a barren womb, Numbers chapter 5. And of course, we understand it's being spoken to by the word of Yah, and it's that word of Yah that will cause barrenness. And listen to me, throughout the Torah, barrenness was the result of being cursed. And so, if that's the case, when Yahweh brought the children of Israel there to speak to them, it was for the purpose of breaking the curse off the land. Romans chapter 8 says, creation's groaning for the manifestation of the sons of Yah. And what's your purpose? To speak to this cursed, arid, desolate, uninhabited place and break the curse off of it. Well, this is a shadow picture of what's taken place, or had already taken place, in Genesis chapter 1, verses 1 through 5. Listen to this. And hopefully you'll see some things that were not even in the notes last night. Genesis chapter 1 says, in the beginning, Father created the heavens and the earth. Now, we know from the book of Psalm and some other places that when Father speaks something into existence, it's in its perfect form. But verse 2 says, and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. We looked in depth at that phrase, without form and void. In Hebrew, it would be translated waste and desolate, and it's literally rendered in the Hebrew language as tohu vabohu. And until the Father speaks that promised word into it, guess what? It is waste and desolate, just like this wilderness area. So I want y'all, we're playing connect the dots here, okay? So I want you to help me to paint by numbers for you, sweetie. We want you to connect the numbers. Are you with me? Well, as I was looking at the phrase tohu vabohu, and I began to look at the individual numeric values of those numbers, those letters, it tallies up to 430, which happens to be the number of years that the children of Israel were indeed in Egypt. And so Egypt becomes a shadow picture of a waste and desolate place as well. Are you with me? Tohu vabohu. When Yahweh spoke the word at the inception of creation, He spoke, creation becomes the womb, the receptacle for the seed of His word to be planted into. When He began to speak creation into existence, He spoke into its womb. And then all of a sudden you find the womb is waste and void, tohu vabohu, and there's darkness and there's light. Darkness is upon the face of the deep. Yahweh has to then speak into that darkness and separate the two. He's separating the two seed lines. I believe the two seed lines are represented by two individuals, the same two individuals you see in Genesis chapter 3, that were personified by the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. the Messiah and the anti-Messiah, or the antitype, which would have been the serpent, also known as Ha-Satan. Okay? Well, we're told, in addition to being tohu vabohu, that darkness is upon the face of the deep. I want to stop just a second and look at those words. The first word is darkness. In the Hebrew, it's Strong's number 2822, choshek. And of course, it's defined as darkness or the secret place. But what I want you to call your attention to is the first letter at the beginning of the word. It's written ket, sheen, kaf. The ket, if you look at its pictographical definition, it's inferring of something that's fencing off a person, place, or a thing, an object. It means in the process of fencing it off that I'm protecting it. It's a protected enclave, if you will. Let's look next at the final two letters, the sheen, kaf. Those two letters form a word in Hebrew, and that word is Strong's number 7753, and it's pronounced suk, just the vowel points changed. And that word also can mean to hedge or to fence something in. And then finally, another definition for the same two Hebrew letters. Pay attention here, because Father's trying to show you something. This is so powerful. 7754 is pronounced sok, just a slightly different variation on the Hebrew vowel points. And that word means a branch or a bough, which happens to be the root of the word sukkah, where you dwell in temporarily at the Feast of Sukkot, tabernacles. And what do? You form a temporary dwelling out of what? Branches. Remember that. Remember that branch in the midst of darkness, okay? Because we're in a waste and desolate, dead, barren place. A bitter place. Now let's look at the word deep. In the Hebrew, it's Strong's number 8415, tahum, and it is rendered a great quantity of waters. If you look at the tav that's appended to the front of it, prefixed, it indicates future tense. I will, she will, they will. Say that with me. I will, she will, they will. Now let's go over it again. I will, she will, they will. Just seeing if you're awake. It's a little exercise. May have been an exercise in futility, but it was an exercise nonetheless. If you will note, there are two other letters that I want to call your attention to. The hey and the mem. The letters hey, mem form a word in Hebrew that means a roar. A roar that ensues from a tremendous commotion of a group of peoples. Now pay attention, because we're going to see that again in a few minutes. Basically, the Hebrew meaning here, in these two words that we're looking at, the earth was without form and void, waste and desolate, barren, uninhabited, uncultivated, which literally belies Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. When Yahweh creates it, it was created in perfect condition. Now it's waste and desolate, uncultivated, uninhabited, barren. And then it says, darkness is also upon the face of the deep. Now, as we looked at these Hebrew words, and you have a more expanded, we've extrapolated a little bit more, here's what it means. The darkness is literally a place or a womb where the branch is planted and protected. Isn't that what that word darkness, choshek, the word branch, sak, means branch. Well, the ket in front of it means it's a place where the branch was planted and protected. Darkness was a place where the womb had a branch planted in it and protected. Where? In the waters, because darkness was upon the face of the deep. It was planted, the branch was planted to the shouting of multitudes. I believe all the hosts of heaven were assembled to watch Yahweh repopulate, reinvigorate this particular womb and seed the womb again. Are you familiar with Exodus chapter 15, verses 23 through 25, the place known as Marah, when the children of Israel were so thirsty and they began to murmur and complain? They began to raise a tumult, a loud commotion. Their voices became a roar. Why? The waters were bitter. And so what does Yahweh tell Moses to do? He says, take a branch or a tree and do what? Put it in the waters. The same thing you see happening here in Genesis chapter 1. You saw the branch put in the waters for what purpose? To sweeten them and stop the roar. Both of these are scenarios that are reminiscent of Numbers chapter 5. You remember Numbers chapter 5? Did you realize the same thing happens when the adulterous bride has her accusations made known publicly? She's brought to the priest. The priest takes those accusations. They're written on parchment. Hyssop. There's your branch. All of those things are mingled together, and she's forced. These waters for her are bitter. But because the branch is involved, the waters are sweetened. Are you following me? She can drink it now and not die from it. That's what's happening in Genesis chapter 1. But we're in the book of Numbers. And the book of Numbers talks about all the hosts of Israel being assembled together. And it looks as if this is really launching us in a different direction. But if you tie all of these things together, what's taking place right here in this Torah portion is a shadow picture of Father reclaiming the womb. Israel's brought out as the seed to do that with. Are y'all following me? This is a rehearsal. It's written for your benefit. It's going to happen again. You're going to reseed this thing. It will take place ultimately in what we would refer to as the millennial kingdom, but we're going to see the inception of it begin prior to leaving out of here. Say amen right there. Amen. Now, while we're here, I want to look at a little bit at that time frame I shared with you last night. Let's go back to Numbers chapter 1, and let's examine the time frame, because this is also really important. Verse 1 of Numbers 1 says, "And Yahweh spake unto Moshe in the wilderness at Sinai, in the tabernacle of the congregation." He shows you where they were located. Gave you the GPS coordinates. "On the first day of the second month, in the second year after they were come out of the land of Egypt, saying," and then he goes into very grave detail, "take the sum of all the congregation." Now, let's look at that phrase, "on the first day of the second month." Well, last night we looked at the Babylonian name that's currently used most often for the second month, and it's the word Iyar. But the Hebrew name is the name Ziv. And what I'd like to do is to examine those in the Hebrew language. Iyar is written with an aleph, yod, resh. And if you will notice, it also is closely related to Strong's number 216. The word is or, the word for light. See that? Aleph, vav, resh. So this month could be rendered the month of light. And then you have the Hebrew word ziv, Strong's number 2099, written with a zayin vav. And that word is also translated in a way that lends credence to the fact that the month has something to do with light being released. Okay? Well, this is the month that they were brought to Mount Sinai. And we understand that light and seed and word are synonymous. They're used interchangeably throughout the Torah. Yeshua was both light, both seed, and both word. And so this, if this is indeed the month of light, then it could also infer that seed is going to be planted simultaneously with the word being planted. Are y'all follow me? Okay. Well, the word ziv is translated as radiance or brilliance. It's actually not really the light, it's the result of the light. Okay? Well, I want to look at the numeric value of ziv. It's written with a zayin vav. Zayin is 7, vav is 6. The total is 13. Of course, that's the number that's associated with the bride. And this will give you some clues at what's taking place, because it's the bride who's been brought here to Mount Sinai. 13 is also the numeric value for the Hebrew word ahava, which means what? Love. But guess what? It's also the numeric value of the word echad as well. 2 become echad, 1, taking you again back to Genesis chapter 1 and 2, where the husband and wife, after having been formed, separated, and then made echad again. I shared with you last evening what the rabbis say regarding the month Iyar. Listen to this. They say that Babylonian stroke Hebrew word literally means or represents the actual source of light. And we understand the source of light would have been Yahweh himself. While the word ziv represents the expansion or the expression of light as it shines far from or exudes from the source. Are y'all follow me? And so we understand that literally would indicate the Messiah. But it could also, as we kind of break it down smaller and smaller, it could also represent a Messiah who was a shadow pictured in the creation of the sun on the fourth day. And of course the sun then would become that source of light, while the moon, the counterpart or the partner representing the bride of the sun, has no light of her own, yet she is seen with radiance and brilliance. Why? Because the source of light illuminated her. Can you see? So what you have here in the two Hebrew words, one has a Babylonian origin and the other one is pure Hebrew, you have a juxtaposition, if you will, of Hebrew, in Hebrew, of husband and bride. And how the two of them, the bride reflects the husband. And yet the husband, even though he is the source of light, if he has nothing to reflect that, he's unfulfilled. Do you see what I'm talking about? Well, this is what's being revealed to you in this Torah portion. The creation then, where we were looking back in Genesis chapter 1, shows you a picture of the womb that was ready to receive the seed, the word, the light. And we saw that the womb was compromised. I firmly believe, and this does not in any way affect creationist view of the young earth. Are you following me? I believe that there was indeed what's known as a gap between Genesis chapter 1, verse 1 and verse 2. I do believe that from verse 2 forward were 6 literal 24-hour creation days. Okay? Now, having said that, I believe that Hasatan, Lucifer, was the source of false light that was released into the womb of creation and caused the womb of creation to be compromised. As a matter of fact, Yahweh tells us later, I believe it's in the book of Job, that he covers the deep for him. Okay? Well, creation's in an adulterous situation with a cursed womb, and yet Yahweh spoke into that womb back in Genesis chapter 1, and he restores it. And in the process of restoring it, just like you see in Genesis chapter 3, when there's a compromise that takes place between Adam, Eve, and Hasatan, you see that same picture all over again. What does Father do? He has to, the womb of the woman's dead because she receives the seed of the serpent. He slaughters the lamb, which is a shadow picture of Revelation 13:8, the one who would take the penalty for that adulterous bride. And so what, in effect, Father does is he restores the womb, and then he has to separate light and darkness again. The two seed line. Are y'all following this? Help me out. Am I just getting myself excited? Man, this is good stuff. Well, what you see here, Numbers chapter womb. Editor, Numbers chapter 1. The wilderness becomes that same womb. Are y'all beginning to see how this picture moves? And it's going to be taken again and put in front of us shortly in the days ahead. How much time do I got left, guys, on this particular side? 1 minute. Well, that same womb here is depicted as being desolate, dead, barren, cursed until what? Yahweh speaks that promised word in it. And what happens? The radiance of that word envelops the moon, which is his bride, Israel. And Israel's purpose was supposed to have been to reclaim. It was a reclamation project. They were supposed to reclaim the entire area, not just what was on the other side of the Jordan. Yahweh had given them the territory. He told Abraham, walk up and down the land in the length and breadth of it. It wasn't just a few city blocks. Now, he takes you again back to Genesis chapter 1, verse 6 and 7.